the way we run these sessions is we'll just pass it out for questions to the audience. So do we have a first question for the panel?
Just as a bit of an icebreaker, really, can any of you tell me what country on the planet has the highest penetration of digital currency use?
I'm tempted to go for Australia, but I think I'm probably wrong.
I'm going to take a guess at the Philippines. I think I saw an article on that.
It's in my brain somewhere, but I'd say it's probably somewhere quite small, and well, I was going to go with the Philippines otherwise, but Jersey.
Well, you're thinking sort of virtual currencies. I'm thinking digital in a broader sense, because it's Somalia. Somalia is basically 100% digital economy because Somali currency doesn't exist anymore, but everybody has a mobile phone. So everybody's using mobile phone credits as a digital virtual currency in the absence of a working government or a working economy, which shows, you know, the sort of strength of the virtual digital model over a fiat model, I think.
I've got something I'll add to that if I can, in that I think that's an area which could be quite useful for Jersey to expand into. We've had a history of working in projects which are both useful for the finance industry in the developed world and also useful in the developing world. I think that could be somewhere where if you had a company that was developing relatively innovative virtual currency technology in Jersey and that expanded out, that could both be quite lucrative and could be a very good story for Jersey, and that's something we've thought about, I suppose.
Is that using M-Pesa or actual credits?
Well, their own version, which is run by the local telco, because a lot of the East African countries, the telcos don't really talk to one another, but yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think the growth of a platform like M-Pesa is definitely shows that if the existing system isn't catered to the population en masse and is only trying to serve small amounts of it, something's going to fill that gap. And I think, okay, in Jersey we definitely have a robust payments network, and for most people they can open bank accounts, and it's not really a problem. But if you look at the internet as a whole, there's a massive load of people who can't transact, and you're going to see a system, much like M-Pesa came through on a country level, that something is going to fill that gap, whether it's something like Bitcoin or whether it is just an emerging other protocol is to be seen. But I think that it's a really good example of if the current system isn't easy to use and open to the majority, something will turn up.
Well, that's why I was interested in James about whether he was targeting the banked or the unbanked, because there are 5 billion unbanked people on the planet. And you can, when I was driving through Tanzania, most towns won't have a bank, but every town will have several little booths giving you mobile phone credits to use as virtual currency.
Yeah, for the remittance business, targeting the unbanked is difficult, as I said earlier. And I think also in the virtual currency space, for quite a number of years we've been hammering home this is going to be great for the unbanked. And there was a report about 2 years ago that basically said, actually, the problem in the unbanked world is that if you give them an advanced smartphone that can run a Bitcoin client, they'll sell it. and that you really don't understand the problems that they're facing. And so to a certain extent, I am always cautious about saying this is going to be great for the unbanked, because apart from the fact that Solidi is unbanked, in general, I do not understand the point where people in the likes of Somalia and Tanzania are coming from. And so I avoid trying to pretend that I do.
There was a TV program. There was a TV program. I can't remember the guy who was doing it, but he's a travel program, and he was going to the source of the Nile. You probably Simon Reeve, I think it might be. Anyway, he went to the source of the Nile, and do you know what there was at the source of the Nile? Very poor people filming him doing his program on mobile phones. It was surreal to see such people in such poverty using mobile phones to film him. So I don't know that they do sell their phones if you give it to them and it's got capability of doing Bitcoin. I think they value it highly, and they don't want to. I think it's more valuable to them than the money they can get selling it.
Yeah, well, perhaps that is true now. Like I said, I think the report I read or listened to, it was a podcast, was 2 years ago. So maybe in the course of 2 years, either smartphones have gone down in price or their earnings have gone up. But that is good to hear, and particularly that mobile phone credit has become a de facto currency, because that gives hope that eventually a pure digital currency will begin to take hold in other jurisdictions.
Does the mobile phone credit have the same backing of immutability, I think is the right word, that, say, Bitcoin does? In other words, is there something like a blockchain behind it? So maybe there's an advantage that Bitcoin could fill?
Yeah, I think something like mobile phone credit is definitely centralized. There's a database somewhere inside the telco that stores who's got credit. I think there's been some really interesting pilot schemes of, could you tie something like Bitcoin into M-Pesa, and therefore opening up the ability to send someone currency that they can use wherever they are in the world from somewhere else. And it's a hard problem to solve because of various value just issues between something like Bitcoin and the way that M-Pesa works. But it has been proved that it's definitely capable. But I think the interesting part about phone ownership is something that if you're in a country that is a developing country, the most important thing you own is a mobile phone. You go to a lot of countries, in Africa or Asia, that nearly everyone will have one. Now, whether it's a dumb phone or a smartphone comes down to cost and the ability to get those units in that country. And that's why I think you're seeing in certain countries that a telco will start selling a really cheap smartphone. Everyone will get a smartphone. I think that will definitely come. But it comes back to my point in my talk about the usefulness around it. If I'm carrying cash and someone says, you can now carry cash on the thing you've got in your pocket already that you used to phone home or whatever, but it's a lot easier to transact, it suddenly becomes a lot more useful, and of course you're going to switch to it. There's a very interesting story about how M-Pesa got past the initial issues they were having with the local banks in the country they started. They were lobbying, saying this is clearly a bank, they don't have a banking license. We want to go to, they went to the finance minister and said, you need to shut these guys down. So he had a meeting with him and said, right, before you say anything, I just want to say that I've done some research. I know that you have a ranch out in the countryside, and I know that your foreman has an M-Pesa account. How would you normally pay him? Okay, well, I'd send someone to the bank to get some cash. I'd then get him to drive out to the ranch and then get him to pay them all. They all go and take their wages and convert it into M-Pesa. He said, oh, that's interesting. How much would you normally pay him for a week? Whatever it was. Okay, I've just paid your foreman. And it was that moment that the finance minister said, even if everything the banks are telling me is true, that you should be doing things in a better way, this is clearly the future. This is clearly what our country needs to be able to get to the next level. And it has grown massively since then. Their penetration in their countries that they started with is high 90s. And those are places where you have to, spend a lot of money to have a bank account if you can get one, just to keep your money safe. So I think the adoption of mobile is definitely showing that, the countries that don't have this legacy technology are going to be leaping ahead of the ones that do.
Yeah, Ray Parker. You were talking earlier on, Jamie, and following an old story of the mainstream banks standing off from giving you banking facilities and what have you. And there we have Robbie indicating that that this is being sort of leapfrogged in developing areas. presumably at some point there's going to come a tipping point where the mainstream banks can no longer do what is in effect a King Canute job in sort of trying to pretend that, you know, this will never become significant enough where they have to do something different, whilst at the same time making significant investments in blockchain technology themselves. This, you know, strikes me as, you know, a logical impasse, really. So does the panel have a view as to when this tipping point will take place, or are they going to be able to stand this off forever? Presumably, you know, in the old days, there would come a point where the Bank of England would have a word with them in whatever clubs they met. Nowadays, I gather this sort of word doesn't take place, but there must logically come a point where they have to recognise that the world is changing. So does the panel have a view as to when that might be?
It's complicated by the fact that the banks have possibly one of two reasons for not allowing digital currency businesses to bank with them. The first would be the worry of money laundering and financing terrorism, and that's something that they're holding quite strongly to, regardless of what the national risk assessment says about that. The second one is an anti-competitive one. Both of those really need government bodies to get involved to sort out. If you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I'd have said it will be sorted in a year or so. So if you're asking me now, I have to say I don't know. And particularly with Brexit having happened, that much is even more uncertain.
Well, I have a close friend who has been a senior banker for decades, and his view is that the banks will be able to stand this off on this very point indefinitely. No matter what any reports say, they are able to say, well, because of this and that risk, you can't ask us to risk our business in making that kind of facility. So that would clearly leave government intervention as the only way out of, the only way forward from that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think when it comes to banking, you have to ask yourself, can you in today's society live without access to banking? You know, and in many respects you can't. The government requires you to have a bank account to pay your taxes. They won't take it in cash. So is access to banking a fundamental human right? And does that extend to businesses? And if so, then can the banks continue to do this? If you're showing that you have a business that ID checks all its customers, that can prove what its customers are using the funds for, where they got the funds from, then why the continued denial of access? And I think it will require, as you say, government intervention of some description, but I think the UK government is not that government to do it at this moment in time.
Just on bank de-risking more generally, we obviously have large amounts of conversations with the banks locally, and to an extent that feeds into their risk committees, mainly based in London, who are responsible for 95% of Jersey-based bank decisions. This area was something that we had discussions more generally on, particularly around the time that Gabby was setting up, and I think we've been many people have come to us and said, when you introduce regulation, then it'll be cool, won't it? Banks will be immediately willing to offer us a bank account. And we've gone, no, that's a commercial decision for them. And we definitely don't think as a small island in the middle of the channel, albeit with a significant finance industry, that will be the tipping point that will move it there. Just in relation to debanking more generally, the points have been very well made, but you are starting to see papers being put out by major international bodies, the IMF, the FATF, all in the last 12 to 24 months, putting out papers saying how problematic debanking more generally is going to become for society. So I think the issue goes beyond simply virtual currency businesses, but I think it's gaining more traction. What I will say in relation to virtual currencies is we had, this is before last Thursday, seen some internal movement, discussions, the mood had changed inside major lending banks. We've started to believe maybe that things were moving. Now, this is again estimation more than anything else, would be that I think those banks are likely to have far greater priorities in terms of their structuring and their risk more generally than looking at emerging business and emerging technology. And I suppose this goes slightly to what will be the effect of Brexit. This is if we're dealing with a UK-based banking institution upon their willingness to become involved in these areas. I also fear that this may have an effect upon the FCA's activity, because they're going to become incredibly taken up with probably what will, if things go down a certain route, a huge amount of financial industry restructuring, which they'll be supervising.
I'd like to take a slightly more positive note.
Please do.
I think the initial conversations that we had when we first started, putting out there that Jersey might be a good location for Bitcoin or crypto-related businesses, the first question everyone asks is, do you have a bank? And then after saying, not at the moment, for several years, the next point is, well, what would need to be in place for there to be a bank here? And I think, I don't think a UK bank is going to be the first bank to say, we are friendly to cryptocurrency businesses. I mean, there are loads of companies in the space that have bank accounts, but they're usually because the VC backers are personal friends or at least clients of these banks, and they can vouch for them. And that really stops innovative small businesses entering the space. You're seeing some companies go around that. I don't know if they still are, but blockchain.info, who are a wallet provider, essentially, have been around for a number of years. Until recently, and they probably still are a 100% Bitcoin company. They pay their staff in Bitcoin. They pay their rent in Bitcoin. They pay for their infrastructure in Bitcoin. They don't need a bank. I'm sure they have one at some point because of the size, but they don't need one. And you're going to see some companies emerge through that. I think the problem is going to be when you're trying to convince someone of the value of using this system, at some point they need to go in and out of fiat. And at some point you're going to need a bank. And so that's probably why you're seeing a shift to a lot of companies talk about blockchain and non-currency related issues, because if you can convince a bank that you're not touching Bitcoin, but you're looking at blockchain for ID or diamond registration or land registration, suddenly that's a lot less risky. But I think a large problem with the banks has been that if you go to them and say, this is my business, this is what I'm doing, I need a bank account, they'll go to their risk and compliance department. Right, which file do I look at for this type of business? Oh, it's got the word Bitcoin in, or cryptocurrency, or even blockchain. Right, we can't touch that because we haven't got any documentation in place. Or we've been told, say no until we've got more information. And I think that the amount of research coming out of banks, that hopefully that will change in the future. But also I think Jersey definitely has an opportunity. You're seeing the amount of banking licenses issued locally, fall away. Certain banks are moving out, certain are being bought out. Jersey would be a great place to hold up a banking license, say, one of the European challenger banks or forward-thinking banks that wants to work with not just Bitcoin and cryptocurrency businesses, but wants to work with emerging startups in the fintech space. Come here, work with us, and we want to, be the first. Jersey could do that. Is anyone from the JBA in the room? that's the problem. I think there's not enough communication from both sides. The JBA seeing that this is an opportunity and maybe it's something they could be offering, and the government saying, if you're not going to do it, we want to get someone in who will. I mean, opening a business bank account in Jersey is getting harder, and that's not just for a crypto business, because a lot of the banks here will just go up the chain to their parent business and say, what do we need to meet? It's not worth our business because it's in Jersey and it's this small account. So I think that there needs to be some kind of government push to put that in place as part of the on-road into Jersey for businesses.
Hi, David Elgio, Treasury Consultant. Totally echo what Robbie was just talking about. A lot of the clients that we're working with, the first question, intermediary clients, is that they ask when they win a new piece of business is, can I bank this in Jersey? And I was reading recently about the Isle of Man have launched the alternative banking regime. So maybe it's a question for George really on if there's any response for government, and maybe this is, is that an opportunity for what we've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, I haven't. I'll be honest and say I haven't had the chance. I did hear that this had happened, but I haven't had the chance to look into a huge amount of detail. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to explain it to everyone. But I think what I would say is that Jersey has had for many years a very successful banking policy in terms of how we'll allow banks to operate in the island. That has changed recently. In the last few years, we've moved away from the top 500 policy. That's now receiving some flex. Each application will be considered on its merits, and the government now has a very declared intention towards expanding and new areas of business, which is including digital innovation. So if there are banks, such as what Robbie suggests, European challenger banks who will be offering different services to new businesses, maybe outside and away from our standard traditional financial services marketplace, I think those applications would be viewed with merit in that it could provide banking services to another area of the economy, which we quite bluntly need to diversify into, and I think there does need to be a shift there. Now, how exactly we go out and attract those type of banks? Do we launch a new regime, a new product? Yeah, that's still very much out there. Jersey Finance are running a project called the Future of Banking, which is coming to conclusion relatively soon, and that encourages, I think, relatively innovative routes of looking at banking provision in the island. So I'll be interested to read the outcome of that. But one thing that certainly I think we'll be considering about in government is what the Isle of Man have done. That needs to link quite closely into the digital strategy that's been launched as well. So I can't provide you with a straight answer to it, save that I think we are open to the fact that the needs of businesses for banking in the island will change, particularly if we want to have the type of different businesses that we want to have a diversified economy in Jersey.
I was just going to ask you a question, George. With the regulation changes coming through, and hopefully there are going to be more inquiries for virtual currency businesses looking at Jersey, what is the point of contact? Is there going to be someone at the JFC or in your department, or?
I can answer it, but annoyingly he's gone, but Ollie is over there. But the point of contact will be inside Digital Jersey initially, as acting effectively as almost a developing marketplace for the digital industry. Now, if Tony was around, I would have pointed directly at him. So, Ollie, sorry for landing on you. Hopefully, that point of contact will allow for links to be immediately made with Locate Jersey if it's an incoming business. So Locate Jersey, for those of you who don't know, are a specialist government department who assist businesses in moving inward investment into the island. That will then assist with going through the requirements of Population Office in relation to licensing. And the JFSC have a policy team now who we've worked with over the last few years who are very keyed up to virtual currency issues. And anyone who's coming to the island should expect them to be very receptive in relation to understanding the type of business that's going on. Now, Jamie might be better to comment on this, but one of the things we'd heard from many people is that you came to a financial regulator and you explained what you were doing in relation to virtual currency exchange. Most of them would be completely confused. We would hope that we're providing something that's different.
Yeah, I think when you explain what you're doing to the FCA, depending on who you talk to, you can either get a blank stare, or you can get a very sort of, we don't regulate digital currencies, and that's the end of it. What Solidi is now doing in terms of international remittance, that does come under their regulation, but ironically, because there's digital currencies involved in it, that may block us from being regulated. So it is very much about trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Just wanted to finish off very quickly on so it's a question for really Jamie and Robbie. So if you had a business bank account with, say, a UK clearing bank, faster payments, Vocalink, the rest, would you be all set? What else would you need?
In terms of Solidi, yes, we'd be all set. Solidi was designed in 2014 from the point of view that we'd fill out the application for a payment institute license with the FCA, and that'd be great. And that turned out to be not possible. So Solidi is ready to go. We just need the access to banking.
So it's that's the one thing that's missing.
Yes,
at the moment.
Absolutely. Can I just come back to Jamie? What about in terms of regulatory approval? So you mentioned in your slideshow you can go one route, which is in relation to an institutional or peer-to-peer effectively, and the other one is directly accessing customers. Would the green arrow, I suppose, would that require a greater level of FCA approval?
Yes. So the green arrow goes to a full remittance business, and we need to then be able to hold customers' money, be able to make payments on their behalf. We have the capital requirements, etc. Yes. So, sorry, in answer to your question, we could go, but we might struggle to bring up the capital requirements. But other than that, we're good to go.
Yeah, I think that is the one thing for the projects that we have in the pipeline. If that was in place, the rest of it can move forwards. It's not worth doing more than prototyping at this stage until you know that you can scale up on a live side. And for some of the businesses, you need a bank, whether it's an exchange or running ATMs. At some point, you're going to need to go in and out of fiat. So to do stuff on scale, yep, definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.